Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor training. Thank you all so much for coming. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Rebecca Scotti, and she's a training and customer success specialist with Respondus. She's been involved with educational technology for more than 15 years. She works on a daily basis with colleges, universities, and school districts to implement solutions for their online testing challenges. So prior to working with Respondus, Rebecca was the director of e-learning with a university in Texas, where she served on the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on colleges committees. She developed faculty training on best practices for online teaching and learning, and she oversaw operations for their LMS. She also presented at OLC Innovate, Texas Ahead, and various user conferences. So join me in welcoming Rebecca.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Susan. Hello, everybody. As you've heard, my name is Rebecca. I'm so excited to be with you here today. We're going to be talking about Lockdown Browser, and I apologize, that says Respondus Monitor, so that's a typo on my part, but we're going to be talking about Lockdown Browser and some really neat things that you can see inside of your dashboard that can be really helpful for you and for your students. Now, in the interest of saving some bandwidth this morning, I'm going to turn off my camera for a little while, and I'll come back on at the end when we do some live Q&A. So let's get started. We're going to take a look at the agenda, and this is what we're going to be talking about through today's discussion. First, the Lockdown Browser. We're going to look at that from an instructor perspective, along with some advanced settings that you might find helpful as you are setting up exams. We're also going to show you the student perspective. What does that look like from a student perspective? And we're also going to share some tips, best practices. We're going to answer some common questions for you. Of course, we're recording today's session, so you'll have a copy of that, and we're going to send along some additional resources that can also be very helpful. So let's start with Lockdown Browser. What is Lockdown Browser? Well, it's a custom locked browser for use in online testing. It prevents cheating, and it can be used in proctored environments. So think about testing centers or even classrooms, and it integrates seamlessly with your Canvas environment. Now, with Lockdown Browser, students cannot print or copy test content. They can't capture screen content. They can't go to other websites or access other applications. So think about things like instant messengers or even other browsers. Now, the integration that we have with your learning system makes it really easy for you to apply the Lockdown Browser setting to any test you have in your course. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually walk us through that experience. So what I've done is I've logged into Canvas here, and I'm just going to start kind of back up at the top so you can see the true course. And you're going to find that Lockdown Browser dashboard located here in your course menu. Okay, so that's located for you on that left-hand navigation panel. And when you select this link, you're going to land by default on the dashboard. And this is where you're going to spend the bulk of your time, because this is where you're going to apply settings. Now, there are some things here that can be really helpful for you. And I'm going to walk through a couple of those things. So first and foremost, you're going to see a tab here called Getting Started. And this has some really helpful information for you, including some sample content for syllabus. And I'm going to cover those items with you in a little more detail a little bit later in the training. Now, you'll see the next tab over, and this has video tutorials. And I'll make a note here that there are tutorials for both new and classic quizzes. So if you're thinking about new quizzes or that's coming for you in the future, know that you've got some videos here. The other thing I'm going to mention is there's a great student overview. This video is a YouTube video, so you're welcome to share that with your students. And you can even embed it in the course if you want to do that. Now, the next tab is called Guides and Support. And this has quick access to our documentation, how to reach our support team if you need help there. But one thing I'll point out that can be really neat for you is you have the ability to connect with a Respondus trainer. And that means that you can schedule a one-to-one conversation. So an appointment basically with a Respondus trainer. And so we're happy to just jump on and answer some specific questions for you as you're working through and applying those settings. Now you'll see on the end over here, there's another tab, and that is called Other Systems. We do support a few publisher platforms. So if you are a Pearson MyLab user, that is supported, or if you're using McGraw-Hill Alex, that's also here for you as well. I won't be covering those in today's training session because there's a lot of content behind that. But if you want to learn more, this link here and here are really impactful. There's some great resources, and there's even a video tutorial. So there's some really great resources. Let's go back now to the dashboard. Now, this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. Remember, I said this is where we're going to apply our settings. And what I'm going to do is locate a quiz that I want to apply the settings to. So you see this list here. This is a list of all my quizzes inside of my Canvas course. So I'm just going to scroll down. We're going to choose this week 5 quiz here. And I'm going to use the drop-down menu to the left to select settings. Now, when I do that, you're going to see I have the option to require Respondus lockdown browser for the exam. And I'm going to select that. Now, notice that when I selected that option, I can see some things underneath, some advanced settings. I'm going to walk you through each of these today. Some of these can be really helpful for you, but you also might come across a situation where you might want to use that setting. So let's start with the password. This is optional, so it's not required, and it's up to you. If you want to add an extra layer of security, you can absolutely do that. And one way to do that is to just type in a password here. This is a password your students would need, so you would want to share that with them. And they're going to type that in before they can begin the assessment. Okay, so that again is optional, but know that you can do that. Now you'll notice the advanced settings, and I'm just going to expand that so you can see all of these options. And I'm going to start right here at the top. The first setting is to require a lockdown browser to view post-exam feedback and results. So maybe you have an exam where you're allowing the students to see maybe incorrect answers, or you want them to see what the correct answer was, and any of those exam feedbacks. You can check the box here. And what happens then is it requires the student to be inside of the lockdown browser to review your exam feedback. So those incorrect or correct answers or other feedback you've provided for the student. And that can be really helpful, right? Because the student then is inside of the lockdown browser. They can't navigate to other things. They can't copy the screen or print that. So there's some benefit to doing that. Now you'll see underneath the option to lock a student into a browser until the exam is complete. Let's talk through that a bit. This option does exactly what it sounds like. The student is locked into the lockdown browser until they have completed the exam and submitted for grading. There are a lot of use cases where you may want to check that option. For example, maybe you have a classroom full of students and they're testing and they're in the physical classroom with you. You may want to choose to lock them into the browser. They're on your campus Wi-Fi or internet connection. You're in the classroom with them. So you may choose to do that. But I also want to say that there are also reasons why you may not want to do that. And I'll give you just one example here, and that is maybe your students are testing remotely. And maybe you and you have students who are testing at home, and you don't know what the home situation is like. The student may lose internet connectivity or other things. Well, when you lock a student into the browser, they're locked into the browser. They can't get out of that until they submitted the exam. So you can see kind of both sides of the coin, if you will, on maybe some reasons why or maybe why not to include that. But that's an option for you here. Now, the next one down can be really helpful, and that is to allow students to take the exam on an iPad. Maybe the iPad is the only device the student has. Maybe your institution has a checkout program, and iPads are one of those devices they can check out. If you want to allow the student to use that device, you're going to simply check the box. Now, note that the student must download the Lockdown Browser app from the Apple App Store. Okay, so they will want to go do that, have it on their device so they can take the exam. Now, this next option is one of my favorites because this happens a lot. This allows access to specific external web domains. And what that means exactly is you're granting access to another resource. I'll give you some examples. Maybe you adopted an ebook or an electronic resource for your course. And maybe you want to allow students to use that resource during the exam. To think about like open book and open note exams. So you can check this box and type in that web domain. And I'm going to couple that with an example here. And I'm just going to type in Amazon because I think most of us have probably seen their website. So when you allow access to an electronic resource, a website, an ebook, you're going to put a link to that resource inside of your test. For example, you could put that with a question prompt. So maybe question number 1 is where you want the student to use that resource. You have a hyperlink there in your test question. When the student selects that, it's going to open in a new tab, okay, inside of the Lockdown browser. And the students can digest the content on the screen. Now, if you did not check this box, that's all the student can do. The student is simply going to be able to digest what they see on the screen. So if there are other links there, they can't access them. And in my example where we talked about Amazon, that Amazon page where you can go to books and movies and houseware and all kinds of stuff, that is blocked for the student. Now that is very different than when you check the box here. So when you check the box here, again, you're going to put that hyperlink inside of your test question. And when that launches for the student, because you've given them access here, now they can navigate anything on that Amazon web domain. So the books, the videos, the Audible or other things that are listed there are now accessible to the student. So you can see how that can be really helpful for an ebook where they're going from chapter 7 to 10 to 2 to 20. So that can be really helpful. And one thing too I'll mention here is you can put more than one. So if your test has quite a bit of references to things or you want them to look at other items, you can put more than one web domain here. So just make sure you're separating those by commas so that each one of those is clearly marked for use. The next thing down is the ability to enable a calculator. And you can choose both standard and scientific here. And I'm going to actually leave this option checked because I want you to see where that would be located when the student takes the test. So here I've selected my advanced settings. Now, once I've done that, I'm going to simply save and close. And when I have done that, you're going to notice now that this column, that Lockdown browser column, your first column, now says required. Okay. Now, because we're inside of Zoom today, you're going to see the student experience, but you're going to see that in a little bit more of a still frame way. So we've just completed, instructor perspective, looking at the settings, some resources that are available to you. We're going to switch gears and look at the student perspective. Now, for your students, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted, there is a question in the chat about those
Sure.
advanced settings and
Sure.
setting, will the advanced setting for iPad work on an iPhone? We don't take tests from an iPhone, but I'm not sure if Steve is referring to just setting up those advanced settings on an iPhone.
Yeah, so Susan, I'll address two things there. First and foremost, and you'll see this in just a moment, you can kind of see it on the screen now. Students can use different devices. They can use a Windows machine, a Mac, a Chromebook, an iPad, or even a lab computer on your campus where that browser's been installed. But taking an exam on an iPhone, or what we would say like cellular phone, an Android phone, students will not be able to do that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One, I'll say that tests really aren't made for the learning system to be digested on the size of screen that's permitted by phone. So they do a lot of pinching and zooming, and that can be really difficult for a student, makes it a very difficult testing experience. But that aside, there are a lot of ways a student can take a test, or devices a student can take a test on. So great question. If you want to continue, by the way, posting questions in the chat, please feel free to do that. I'm going to answer those for you at the end. And obviously you guys can also ask questions out loud at the end as we get to that point. So quickly here, I'm going to say from a student perspective, right? It is a one-time installation of the custom browser from your institution's unique link. What does that mean? It's simple. They can't go out to Google and download Lockdown Browser. They have to use the Lockdown Browser associated to your institution. And you heard me just mention this, but I'm going to say it again. The student can test on a Windows device, so it could be a laptop, a desktop, a Mac, a Chromebook, or an iPad, or even a lab computer where that browser's been installed. Now, we just talked about iPads and how you have to check the box, so just make sure that you've checked that inside of the advanced settings for the instructor so that the student can use that device. Now, let's take a look at what this looks like for a student. So there is a difference when you get to that point, and I won't labor on it, but between classic and new quizzes for Canvas. But I know the majority of you using Canvas classic quizzes, so that's the way we're going to do it today. So for students, they're going to download and install the Lockdown Browser. They're going to locate that on their desktop. So you can see it here, right about center of the page, downloaded on my desktop. Now, if they're using a Mac, they're going to find it in their applications folder, which they can move on to their desktop if they choose to do that, but know that it might be in a different location for Mac users. And they're going to launch the application. So they're going to open the Lockdown Browser. When they do this, you can see here the Lockdown Browser is launching automatically. They're going to be presented with the login page for your institution. So the student's going to type in their login credentials for Canvas, username, and their password, and they're going to log in. That student is going to navigate to the course. They're going to find that quiz that you are asking them to take, and they're going to begin that assessment. So here the student can take the quiz. And I want you to notice, so here's a good example of what it looks like. Notice that when the student is inside of the Lockdown Browser, there's no menu bar here, right? So the student doesn't see that. There's no address field. They can't type in a URL. There's no start button down at the bottom of the screen, or system tray or dock, right? So they don't see that down at the bottom of their screen. Notice that the browser's in full screen here, so they can't minimize the screen and access other applications. So things like right-click menus, keyboard commands to copy, paste, or print. Even Alt-Tab, Control-Alt-Delete, and function keys are disabled, so the student can't print the screen. It's blocking all screen capture, instant messaging, and screen sharing applications. However, your antivirus or your security software is still running here in the background. So once the student has started the test, they're going to be unable to exit until they've submitted for grading. And you'll notice here too that the student doesn't see other parts of Canvas. So they can't go to other parts of the course and access other materials. All they're seeing is that test, and it's as it's presented to them. So your test content and settings are the same as they are in a regular browser. Now, I'll point out quickly here, sort of at the top of the page, you see what I would say is a ribbon. And one of those items is a calculator icon. And that's what you're going to use if you have the calculator turned on for the test. So you can open that and close it as you need to. And so that's what it looks like. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of tips and best practices with you. So we've seen now what it looks like from an instructor perspective, a student perspective, but let's do some tips and best practices. So first, try it yourself. Now you'll need a student account or a student login to do this, but it really helps you understand that testing experience, and it allows you to then use that experience to decide which customizations you want to apply to the Lockdown browser. So which settings you want to choose. And remember, we saw a lot of advanced settings, so there are quite a bit that you can check or uncheck based on your needs for the course. Make sure you share the sample wording with the student. And what I'm going to do here is just pause and take you right back to the course and show you where that's located. So you'll remember on the Getting Started tab, I said, oh, there's some cool things here, but we're going to come back to that later. We've arrived at later. And here's where you're going to find that. This section, number 2, has instructions that you can provide to students. So here I can choose classic quizzes. Maybe I'm using Lockdown browser for my test, and I can copy this content. I can paste it and customize it so it really reflects my exam expectations. And I can share that with students in multiple locations. One of those locations could be your syllabus. It's a great place to put this. You can also post it in your course module if we're using that, or even in your course announcements, so it's available to the student. And one thing I want to point out here is there's some great guidelines and tips and even things about how to get help. And that can be really helpful for your student who is testing maybe in hours where you're not available. So that's available for you here too. And you'll notice there's some sections in brackets, and those are sections you can customize. So for example, if you want the student to reach out to your local help desk before they submit a ticket with Respondus, that's all something you can customize right from inside of here. The other thing is make sure to set up a practice quiz and require it if you can. Leave that practice quiz open and available so students can return to that whenever they need to. This is a great opportunity for your students to try out Lockdown browser in a low to no stakes environment. Really helps the student get familiar with the technology, but also to understand your expectations for the exam. And also gives you an opportunity to allow students to fumble a bit. And I'll give you an example. As is often the case with students, technology doesn't work for them. They broke their laptop or they dropped it and they need a new device, they got a new device. Having that practice quiz allows students to be able to, make sure their technology is working before they have that high stakes exam. Really the exam that costs them points for the course. Now, I wanted to point out, and you can see, I'll just scroll up a bit, you can see I'm on the Getting Started tab here. Down underneath your section number 2 is a section called Create a Practice Quiz. And there are some great tips here about practice quizzes. So it gives you some ideas about what you might want to include. And I'll just mention a couple of things. There are some great questions we've heard from other institutions where the practice quiz is over their academic honor code. We've had some use the university's sort of colors and mascot and school song and things like that to create something fun for the student to do. So those are really great ideas for practice quizzes. So that's available for you here. Okay, finally, there are tons and tons of resources to support both you and your students. And they're built right into the Lockdown Browser dashboard, right? You've got rollout guides. Remember, you can schedule instructor office hours with a Respondus trainer. There's guides and tutorials and templates and more. You can also go out to our website and visit us at respondus.com. And don't forget to tell your students about the embedded troubleshooting. And this is one that is really difficult to show you because we're inside of Zoom today. But when the student launches Lockdown Browser, there is what we call a help center. So it's embedded in there for the student to utilize should they be experiencing some technical difficulties. There's also some great resources I'm going to show you on the website in just a moment that are available for students, and you can share that with them. So a lot of great resources to support your students. I mentioned this earlier, but we did record today's session, and I'm also going to send some links to you after today's discussion is over. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to answer some commonly asked questions for you. And I'll also pop open the chat window and make sure that I'm answering questions that also come into the chat window. So feel free to pop those questions into the chat window. I'll be answering those too for you live. So a couple of things, right? You heard me talk about offering a practice quiz. That helps the student kind of get started, get familiar with the technology, but you can also provide them some instructions using that syllabus template that you saw just a moment ago. And those two things can really help a student get off on the right foot and make it easy for the student. There are, by the way, also things out on our website. And so I'm going to show you that now. I'm just going to take you right out to our website. And I'm going to show you where those student resources are located. So here I am on the respondus.com website. And if you scroll down to the bottom here, you're going to see a section called Student Help. And this section has a ton of resources. So not just a video, which we all know our students love, but there's a quick start guide here, and you can see that for Canvas Classic quizzes. There's a whole section dedicated to technical support. Where is the Help Center located in Lockdown Browser? How do I use that? How is the Meta support ticket? So your students are most welcome to submit a support ticket with our technical support team. They're phenomenal individuals, and they are best in class, and they're happy to help students. And occasionally students will tell you they would rather go look up answers themselves. If that's the case, you can also share this link here to our knowledge base. And that has a frequently asked questions section for students. So these are questions that students have asked our support team, and we've kind of compiled together to make a FAQs section on our knowledge base. So that is here as well. So this is a great resource for students. I know today I talked about a lot of resources for you as instructors, but remember that we have a lot of resources for students. So this is a great page for your students. Remember, they also have embedded troubleshooting, what we call the Help Center, built right into the application for them. So those are great ways for your students to get started. Another common question we get is, does Respondus affect my course or my class test settings? And the answer to that is no. Your settings inside of your Canvas test settings, things like time limit on a test, or things like showing questions one at a time, that type of settings are not impacted whatsoever if you choose to use Lockdown Browser for an exam. So you can set those settings, and those will carry through if you decide to use Lockdown Browser. So there's no impact there whatsoever. There was a question early on, and thank you, Susan, for asking that out loud. If a student could use an iPhone, since they could use an iPad. And we talked a little bit about that, but I'll just kind of reiterate again, the devices that are supported are a Windows machine, a Mac, a Chromebook, an iPad, or even a lab computer on your campus where that browser has been installed. So they have a lot of options. And just to clarify, we talked a little bit about new quizzes, classic quizzes. I know you guys are using classic quizzes. That's what we showed today. But if you have any questions about that, definitely let us know. Okay, there was a question in the chat about, can we use this while giving exams in math software like MyLab or Alex? And this is a great question. And the answer is you can come to the Other Systems tab. So if you're looking at my screen, I'm on the Lockdown Browser dashboard. There's a tab to the far right called Other Systems. If you're using MyLab, there's a link here. If you're using McGraw-Hill Alex, there's a link here. I'm just going to click on one so you can see what this looks like. But here is our website. Again, there's some great resources here for you. I highly recommend the video. It's really short, but it covers both the instructor and student perspective. And I'll just take a quick moment to copy the link to our webinars page because we have dedicated webinars just for those topics. So if you are thinking about using MyLab or Alex, definitely come out to our webinars page. Those are coming up pretty quick. You can sign up for one of those sessions. There was a sort of a comment, this is a great tool if they were to take it in a computer lab or a testing center, but what prevents the student from using their iPhone or taking a picture or still looking up information while they're at their computer at home? And this is a great question. Absolutely. So there's a couple of things, right? With Lockdown Browser in the classroom, it does a really good job because you are in the physical classroom with them. So there's things like you're looking, watching, and observing, but you have some assurance that they're not navigating to other digital resources, right? Because they're inside the Lockdown Browser. So they're not looking at other websites or open other applications or instant messaging each other across the room. So you can feel rest assured that when you turn your back to help another student, they're not doing something that is a compromise to their test. So you're right, absolutely, it works great in those environments. When a student is testing remotely, how do you ensure that the student isn't using their phone or using other digital resources from that mobile device, or even looking at their book or doing other things? And there's a couple of things I'd like to say about that. There is another option that we didn't discuss today, and that could be really helpful for that situation. What I've had some institutions share with me, and I've also seen done, is the institution is really clear about what those expectations are from a student. So the student, for example, if you are caught cheating, if you are using other resources, or you're caught doing, I'm just going to turn my webcam on so you can see me here, or you're caught using things that aren't expected, there's some really high stakes for that. So some institutions I've worked with have said that the academic honor code is something they require the student to confirm they've read, so the student is held accountable for that. But you as instructors know. You're looking at it and you're saying the student completed the test in 10 minutes. There are some answers here that don't seem like the student would have responded to, or they're not doing very well in their regular academic materials, but they did exceptionally well on a test. And those are all indicators for you, flags for you to look and say, is this a student I need to visit with? Is this a student who can't test remotely anymore? They're going to have to come to our Proctor facility, come to our testing center on campus. Those are all things that you can work through with your campus, especially with their policies and what they recommend and require. But those are things to be thinking about. So I appreciate you asking that question out loud, because those are real concerns for you as an instructor. Be thinking about those things. Are they using that mobile device while they're taking the test? Or it may not even be that. Are they looking at notes? And those are things that I think your institution is looking at and working through. So definitely, if you have some of those concerns, visit with your folks on campus. Ask them for advice. What are other instructors doing? How do I prevent that from my students testing remotely? What advice can you give me? They're going to have great answers for you, by the way. You have a phenomenal team at your institution, so they'll be happy to help you with that. I think I got to everybody's questions, but I'll pause here. And Susan, if there's anything you'd like me to answer or show, I'd be happy to do that.
I think it was very detailed, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And I will just, Susan, quickly, I'll just put up a slide to share some contact information. That way, if any of you have questions post our discussion today, you can feel like you can reach out to me. So real quick, I'll screen share for just a moment here. And here is some contact information for you. So first and foremost, if you're like me and you leave today's session and you think, I should have asked, or I have a specific scenario, please feel free to reach out. You can reach me at training@respondus.com. And I'll be happy to visit with you. Remember too, you can schedule office hours. So if you want to talk through something at length, schedule office hours. Let's visit about it. I also put our technical support team here. Y'all, they are phenomenal. They're best in class. You heard me mention that earlier, but you can reach them at respondus.com/support. And they'd be happy to answer questions for you as well. Remember, your students can also submit tickets, so that you can direct them here as well. So thank you so much for your time and attention today. It was my pleasure to visit with you. I'll hang here for just a few minutes and see if anybody has any additional questions. Thank you, guys.